This is Defiance Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. Guess what, folks? It's Corruption Day in Washington, D.C. That's what's going on in our nation's capital. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how this week the United States Senate is focusing its time on the issue Americans care about most. Nope, not the war in Iran. No, not the potential war in Cuba. No, sorry, not rising prices or inflation, but the ballroom. Donald Trump's billion-dollar ballroom. That is what's consuming the United States Congress this week. But it doesn't stop there, because we're going to tell you today about the latest developments with Trump's other pet project that's consuming Washington, D.C., namely the multi-billion-dollar slush fund that Donald Trump's Justice Department is creating, not to just pardon his criminal allies, but to be able to give them cash for their troubles, for having been investigated. This is not a joke. It is likely one of the biggest, most corrupt acts in the history of the United States, not just the American presidency, the history of the United States. We're going to talk about that today. But it's not all bad news, because you know what? There are ways to fight back. And we're going to bring you a story this evening about one of the ways state and local officials are saying we've had enough of the federal corruption and what they are doing about it. And then finally, it's not just officials who can fight back, it's ordinary citizens. And we're going to have a guest with us today from the American Civil Liberties Union, who's going to talk about a very important First Amendment lawsuit that's being brought against this administration. We're going to have that conversation later in the program. But first, if this is the first time you're hearing my voice and you're wondering what on earth is Defiance, well, go check us out at defiance.org. We are a nonprofit club for the courageous that was started to fight back against Donald Trump's corruption and abuses of power. That's it. We exist to answer one question: what can I do? And every single week, in addition to talking about the scary things that are happening in the American Republic, we provide actionable, real options to fight back. And every Wednesday, we and our members announce organizations and efforts that we are funding to do exactly that. If these guys are going to flood the zone with corruption, we are flooding the zone with accountability. So go check out defiance.org. Sign up to get our updates for free if you want to see what all this is about, or become a member and start fighting back today. All right, first story today. I want to bring you the good news first. Now, it's not good news why this happened, but it's good news that people are pushing back. So we're going to start tonight in Minnesota, where the fallout continues from what was called Operation Metro Surge. You remember that? That was Donald Trump's immigration crackdown that resulted in 3 shootings by the hands of DHS agents, leaving 2 American citizens dead. Now, today, there was a major development in the non-lethal shooting case. Hennepin County attorney and close friend of Defiance.org, Mary Moriarty, announced felony assault charges against ICE agent Christian Castro, stemming from the January shooting of Venezuelan immigrant Julio Sosa Celis. Now, I want to bring my co-host, Xander Schultz, into the conversation here. And Xander, I want to take a minute to focus on how Mary was able to do this, because from the start, federal agencies refused to cooperate in these investigations. This was a federal invasion of a state. And district attorneys like Mary Moriarty started to say, we can't put up with this. We can't just let federal agents come in here, shoot American citizens, shoot immigrants, and get away with it. And so she was one of many who did something about it. Give me that background. Tell folks who aren't aware at how some of this came to fruition, where the accountability process began.
Well, a lot of the folks that are here with us were there when the process began, at least our engagement with that process. We had a chat going with Larry Krasner, he was kind of the first DA that really was beating his chest confidently saying, if you commit crimes here in Philadelphia, you will be prosecuted. I will hold you accountable. And we asked Larry if he was sharing those findings with other DAs, because we all need ICE agents to be accountable and not be above the law. And so we asked Larry if he was advising other DAs. He said he wasn't yet, and there wasn't a group across the country coming together to help DAs understand how to win these fights. Because Miles, this is unprecedented territory, right, buddy? Like the idea that you have to work around the federal government, who's going to be actively blocking you from holding people accountable for things like murder, as intense as murder, unprecedented. And the legal system is not really, obviously built for ways that the state can keep justice in its jurisdiction in many cases. And so we worked with Larry and Mary to build a network of DAs called the Fight Against Federal Overreach, or FAFO. And you can see the tagline, "No one is above the law," which is something we were all screaming, especially when all this shit was going down in Minneapolis. And we were having people like JD Vance or Stephen Miller tell us that's not true. Our guys are above the law. They're immune. They have federal immunity, confidently. And so this group came together, and over months, and I think for some people, it's felt like a long time, right? We're not used to seeing a murder in broad daylight like we did with Alex Preddy and Renee Good, and there not be some mechanisms of justice working, a trial underway, unless, maybe with the outliers of, what we've seen with some of the police killings, over the years here. But, for a lot of Americans, they were in shock that they weren't seeing the mechanisms of justice falling into place. But this is a challenging time, and there's lots of ways the Trump administration can block or delay or protect these individuals, including, some of what you were talking about, like not sharing evidence, blocking people from a crime scene. But this group's been convening for months now, and they're finally have put together a playbook where they can start rolling out some of these trials. And Miles, like we talked about this with the boycott of Disney, that you don't need to win every fight. You just need to show that you have the ability to win fights, to break the aura of invincibility. And I think Mary is starting to pick and choose cases where she can break that aura of invincibility and start holding ICE agents accountable.
Totally. And I mean, look, we're not claiming credit for Mary's case that she's bringing, but in creating this network, Defiance.org members help make sure that the things that FAFO members like Mary Moriarty are doing can be done and duplicated in other districts around this country. And we spoke last week about how these prosecutors in this FAFO network are going to be doing more as election time comes up. And we teased that a little bit last week. There'll be news tomorrow on that subject that you're going to see in the press, maybe as early as tonight. But this is why it matters to stand up. This wouldn't have existed if it weren't for brave DAs, the brave members of Defiance.org to say, no, we're going to get a network of prosecutors and we're going to start pushing back. And here's why it's so important, Xander, is if there isn't pushback, then the federal narrative is the one that prevails. And the abuse of people's constitutional rights happens without accountability. And in this case, that Mary Moriarty just brought charges in, Kristi Noem, the former Secretary of Homeland Security, had described the encounter, had described this shooting as, quote, an attempted murder of federal law enforcement, right? And federal officials had claimed the agent had endured this prolonged attack, and there was a broom and a shovel, and they were coming after him. But then, early last month, the actual video surfaced. And suddenly, the Department of Homeland Security's whole timeline collapsed because that footage showed the confrontation lasted roughly 12 seconds, not several minutes. And federal prosecutors eventually dropped the charges against these Venezuelan men who they had claimed were trying to kill federal agents and who they had shot at. ICE officials later acknowledged officers had made untruthful statements under oath in that case. To put it another way, they lied about this. They lied about an attempted murder from these migrants who they shot at. And here's the detail that I just want to underscore here, because I think it once again shows the sheer egregiousness of this administration being replicated across these agencies like ICE. According to the New York Times, federal investigators had access to that surveillance footage within hours of the shooting. But prosecutors didn't watch it, apparently, until nearly 3 weeks after they'd already brought charges and filed them against the man that they shot. That's not just sloppy, Xander. That's criminal.
Has the video evidence ever exonerated the Trump administration? Like when we've been able to go to the tape, has there been one freaking time where the DHS line turned out to be correct in this whole escapade? Or even Trump administration more broadly? Like the boat, anytime we got a video of the boats in the Caribbean, anytime we got a video of any of these freaking DHS shootings, these ICE shootings, and God knows, what we haven't seen that they're claiming, we should just assume they are lying about everything at this point.
Well, it's the opposite of the old adage, under promise and over deliver. This administration over promises from the start and then under delivers. They're like, yeah, they were domestic terrorists and they were trying to set off a nuclear weapon. Oh, wait, it was an innocent, unarmed person who we executed in their car. You know, I mean, it's just like the contrast is extraordinary. But the good news here, Xander, is these folks are not escaping accountability. Now, if we left it to the Trump administration to police their own, they would be escaping accountability. But now, months later, thanks to a brave district attorney in Minnesota, that ICE agent himself is facing 4 felony assault charges, a misdemeanor of false reporting, and an active warrant for his arrest and a $200,000 bond. So Mary Moriarty held a press conference about this today, announcing the charges. She was on the program with us last week. But let's take a look at this announcement.
Castro was not under any physical threat when he fired his weapon or even before a shovel or a broom. In fact, he was not hit at all. His own boss, ICE Director Todd Lyons, acknowledged that 2 ICE agents lied in the aftermath of this incident. Mr. Castro was one of them. The hastily charged federal case against Mr. Sosa Solis and Mr. Alhornia were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. The crimes that the federal government alleged they committed never occurred. Yet, the Department of Homeland Security press release containing those lies and making accusations of attempted murder against individuals at whom Mr. Castro shot still remains on its website today. A violent crime did occur that night, but it was Mr. Castro who committed it. He shot through the door of a home with many people, including children, inside, while fortunately missing several others. His bullet did struck Mr. Sosa Solis in the thigh. Mr. Castro is an ICE agent, but his federal badge does not make him immune from state charges for his criminal conduct in Minnesota. I've said it many times, and I'll say it again. There is no such thing as absolute immunity for federal officers who commit crimes in this state or any other.
What a boss. What a boss. I got to tell you, I mean, the worry after this all happens, Xander, is that, you know, prosecutors in the states wouldn't bring these cases because, as many people expect, this agent and his defense team are probably going to try to move this case into federal court, right? Where they think they're going to have some advantage, where they think they might be able to evade accountability. But what I love, Xander, is that in that press conference, Mary also made clear that no matter what, Minnesota prosecutors are still going to pursue the case. And she noted that if this ICE agent is ultimately convicted on state charges, well, guess what? He's not eligible for a Donald Trump presidential pardon. He can't escape it through that pathway. She also said, by the way, that her office believes they will be able to fully fight this legal fight going forward, despite the David versus Goliath effort when you're talking about the federal government protecting one of these folks. So I think that's significant, and it sends the signal to other prosecutors around this country, don't be scared to take on DHS or the Trump administration.
Totally. You mentioned it sends a signal. It's also this whole, just that press conference is a type of deterrence for ICE agents. This is already breaking that aura of invincibility. We talked, Miles, you and I spoke on Friday, I think, about Trump saying that he was going to send armies of election security officers or whatever he was calling them to the polls. And we were saying that is already voter intimidation. Even if he never sends them, that's a type of voter intimidation. This is the good version of that. Mary and her team are sending a warning shot across the country saying, doesn't matter what your boss said. Look what this guy's going through. And Miles, as you know, just being attacked illegally is challenging in and of itself. Even if you come out victorious on the other side, if there's a trial and you're on trial, you've got to lawyer up. You've got to figure out how to fight the thing. That it's already a deterrence. And so just her posture is so important. The way she's speaking plainly is so important. It emboldens us all. We should all be recruiting. If you're not in a district that has a district attorney that's joined FAFO, you should push them to join FAFO so they're equipped with the best game plan possible to fight this fight. And it's inspiring.
Yeah. In fact, let's get specific for folks, because we're not just about reading the news. We're about doing something about it. If you reach out to your local prosecutor, your local district attorney, which you can find by Googling it, right? If you live in, Knoxville, Tennessee, you're just going to type in Knoxville, Tennessee district attorney, right? You're going to find their general email box. You can email them and say, hey, you should join federaloverreach.org and hold the administration accountable. And you can give them an email, hello@federaloverreach.org, to reach out to. And I think that's how they can go, Xander, and try to get plugged in to this organization that we helped incubate. And that's really important to do, because you cited the midterms. That's another example where we're probably going to need local prosecutors to stand up against federal overreach. And there's one other thing folks can do out there. If ordinary folks want to make a difference, reach out to Mary Moriarty's office and thank her, or post on socials in their comments or elsewhere. Moriarty is Moriarity. Go look up Mary Moriarty and send them a thank you. Mary even told us,
I'm happy you did that
past programs, that public outreach has made a difference. And y'all who are watching have heard me say it enough times, but in our own case, it felt like a David and Goliath situation. And my wife and I decided to fight back because we heard from so many of you around the country say, no, don't back down. So that makes a difference. If you got a minute, especially if you're listening to the rest of this program, do it while I tell you about the next story. Reach out or make a comment on Mary Moriarty's post or her office's post and say, this is what we need. And by the way, this is not a partisan thing, folks. If a Democratic president was doing this same stuff, I'd be saying we need prosecutors around this country telling the federal government, hell no, you can't have your agents come in and say that they have total immunity. They can do whatever they want. They can shoot whoever they want. They're not going to be prosecuted. No, they're still private citizens who can and should be prosecuted for breaking the law. So
we've got to stop saying once a week we give marching orders. We are now at a daily cadence of like what to do.
Daily cadence of things you can do.
Yeah, I like it. I think people are, what we've heard from our members, we have yet to hear from our members, slow down. You're giving me too much to do. There is a underserved desire for Americans to know how to fight back and know how to protect themselves against this administration, know how to eventually win and restore rule of law, as we mentioned in a bunch of our other democratic norms.
Well, I'm going to tell you about one other thing that I said, Xander. I got real pissed off on, I don't know, what was it, on Friday about the Donald Trump and this reported slush fund.
That's also starting to be a daily routine. You can
and we're going to do something about it. In fact, I was looking down at my phone because a couple of the folks that I messaged, I was seeing if they responded yet. I'll talk about that in a second. But let me back us up and talk about the story, because this is bound to be a focal point of the week and maybe the rest of this administration. Two big things to talk about here when it comes to corruption in the nation's capital. As you may recall, Xander, Republicans are hard at work trying to push through their giant reconciliation package, this big budget bill to fund ICE and CBP and the federal government through 2029. And buried inside of that package was up to $1 billion for Donald Trump's White House ballroom project, which, by the way, Trump repeatedly said would be privately funded. It's donors. Remember that? Remember that, Xander, when he said that we weren't going to have to pay for it?
This is the new wall. This is the new Mexican wall. It's the ballroom. We're never going to pay for it. Never mind. You're funding
Mexico will pay for it. Well, that's absolutely right. Because over the weekend, their plan hit a major snag. We go to WUSA 9's reporting Saturday night for the update. We'll talk about it on the back end.
For President Trump tonight, less than 2 hours ago, the Senate parliamentarian ruled that the $1 billion requested for security for the president's ballroom would need 60 votes for approval. That means Democrats would have to get on board to approve taxpayer dollars going towards the ballroom, a near impossible task given the makeup of the Senate. Senate budget Democrats said in a statement tonight that they would oppose any future provisions of the funding bill to appease the parliamentarian.
Okay, so it gets better because here we are on Monday, Xander, and the Senate Republicans are suddenly looking a little bit uncomfortable. Why? Because the Senate parliamentarian, she made that ruling based on what's known as the Byrd Rule, which basically prevents lawmakers from stuffing a bunch of unrelated things into these big budget bills unless they're directly tied to federal spending and revenue. So in plain English, you're not supposed to sneak random pet projects into a budget bill and pass them with only 51 votes. So now, according to the publication The Hill, Republicans are scrambling for a workaround to keep the ballroom alive, all right? That's what your representatives are busy doing this week, is they're trying to rewrite the language to make this work. And their new method is basically procedural camouflage. Senate Republicans are now reportedly debating whether to remove direct references to the ballroom entirely from the bill language. Not removing the money for it, just changing the wording so they're not directly talking about a ballroom. Instead of explicitly saying that, they'd like to hide the funding under broader phrases like, quote, East Wing modernization or security infrastructure upgrades. That's what they're trying to do, Xander. And I think people see through the gimmick, but it's also pretty distressing that we're at that level of sycophancy that Republicans are like, no, we will not go down without a fight. Inflation may be surging, wars may be fought by the United States, but we will suck up legislative time to fight to make sure that we find a way to trick the Senate parliamentarian into letting us vote on a ballroom.
Miles, sometimes I get the sense that things like, I don't know, coding the project you want in different words and getting it passed in budget reconciliation are things that happen in Washington all the time. But this administration is so bad at it that we get to see it fail at first and then get to see that process. Is that the case? Like, am I reading that right? That things like this do happen in Washington. They just don't fall on their face so publicly usually when people are trying to get pet projects through during budget reconciliation? Or is the scale of this and the audacity of this a total outlier from the things you've seen in your 20
both.
Yeah.
Both, because this is usually happening on trivial things, right? Someone tries to slip something into a bill and the parliamentarian says, hey, that's out of order. You can't do that. But it's usually not $1 billion presidential vanity project, right? So, you know, the old phrase, we're watching the sausage get made. This is it. This is the gross part about watching the sausage get made and how far these Senate Republicans are willing to go. Because often these things happen behind the scenes. But the fact that they've now been exposed doing this and they're still fighting, but there is potentially a sliver of hope in there, Xander, because as this story has become more public, reportedly, Senate Republicans have gone to the majority leader, John Thune, and said privately, they don't want to be put in a position to vote on this. They're getting a little bit nervous. Why? Because this looks stinky as hell. And one GOP senator
and say we vote for a ballroom. Yeah,
we got you the ballroom you wanted, America.
Totally.
One Republican senator told The Hill, quote, I don't think they have the votes for it. And another admitted there's, quote, a lot of discomfort because the funding came out of the blue and was meant to be privately funded, which, by the way, Senate Democrats are smelling blood in the water here. They definitely are. And they're preparing amendments this week, basically to force Republicans, even if they find some workaround, to force them anyway to vote on a ballroom, up or down. Tell us, do you want a ballroom or not? Which will put vulnerable Republicans like Senator Susan Collins and Dan Sullivan and John Husted in a difficult spot, having to choose between Trump's dance hall and things like lowering healthcare costs. So honestly, Xander, I think we should join that pressure campaign. What do you think today? This is not usually our Action Wednesday, our weekly mission brief, but I think we could urge people to participate in the fun Xander, what phone number could they call to put pressure on the Senate?
I don't know. Do we have that up here? Oh, there it is. 202-224-3121. And tell Senator Colin Sullivan. And who's that last one? My eyes are tired.
Husted.
To vote
To
no.
vote no.
On the very hard decision on if you should have a $1 billion ballroom or grocery.
Okay, so write this down. We want you with us for the rest of the program. Or you
Yeah.
can put us on mute and dial this number. You're basically going to dial 202-224-3121. Write it down. And you're going to ask for one of those offices. You either wanted to talk to Senator Susan Collins' office, or maybe you want to talk to Dan Sullivan's office, or maybe you want to talk to John Husted's office. You're going to call them. I don't know if we can put the number back up. There it is. You're going to call them and you're going to say, why the hell is your boss thinking about buying the president a ballroom when we can't even buy ourselves a damn tank of gas?
I like that.
Right?
I like that
Let
script.
them have it.
Yeah.
This is important. I know people roll their eyes at calling Congress. Typically, the ones rolling their eyes are the ones not willing to make the phone call, right? They're looking for an excuse to say, I don't want to pick this up and dial that phone number. Pick it up. So they're not going to send federal agents after you. First Amendment protected speech. This is you calling your member of Congress and saying, stop it. This is disgusting. Focus on what matters. They need to get nervous. And if they get nervous, hopefully, they strike this thing down. So anyway, that's the plan. One more action you can take today, friends.
I love this. I love this role we're getting on, Miles. Segment action. This
Feels good.
I mean, we can't cut checks every segment. We've got money pretty quick, but we can give an action every segment.
That's right. Well, and one quick update, Xander, before we move on, because we spent a good amount of time on Friday talking about Donald Trump's proposed presidential slush fund, which I mentioned earlier. You'd have to have been hiding under a rock to not see that breaking story today. But the short version is, months ago, Donald Trump sued the IRS and said, I'm suing my own IRS for $10 billion as compensation for the IRS allegedly putting Donald Trump's tax information out there when they shouldn't have during the Biden administration and previously. So he sues them. And today, Donald Trump officially settled that lawsuit. Remember, he's arguing with himself. He is both the president and the one that oversees the Justice Department and the IRS. Settled that lawsuit in exchange for DOJ putting together a $1.7 billion fund to be able to spend on people who've broken the law. Now, what they're calling this is an anti-weaponization fund that's going to be spent on people who were pursued during the Biden administration by DOJ weaponization. That's what they're saying they're doing with this now. But according to the terms that were reported by ABC on Friday, Donald Trump and his 5-member commission will be able to give that money to whoever they want and whatever amounts they want and not have it be publicly disclosed. Biggest slush fund in American history given to a president who can just give it out to his allies. They reported some of it was going to go to January 6th attackers. So the people who beat up cops and spread feces on the walls of the U.S. Capitol might actually get turned into millionaires because of this. Not only did they get presidential pardons, but they might get turned into millionaires. Donald Trump could hypothetically give money to his family funds and different organizations tied to him as compensation for the trouble they suffered for him being investigated for actual crimes. He could turn into millionaires the disgraced lawyers who've been prosecuted in state courts around the country for helping to give him the opportunity to overturn the 2020 election, and on and on and on. This slush fund is now being brought into existence. And mark my words, folks, this will be remembered as one of the most corrupt things ever carried out by an American president. So, there's that, Xander, which is no small matter. But, that became official today. I know we talked a lot about it on Friday. And of course, amidst all of this, Donald Trump also gets an apology from the government that he runs, right? So the government that he runs has to issue him an apology, for having investigated him for committing crimes.
So you should buy stock in, what's the corniest shit that people spend money on. What should you buy stock in that these January 6 millionaires are going to be buying with their millions of dollars? You know what? Good.
That's right.
Take the money. And look, we're going to have accountability. I can't say if it's going to be this year or next year, but you know, if they're going to out themselves more because it's going to be Jan 6ers with boats. All right. Like, why not? This party is going to end, gang. It is going to end. They're having fun with our money. They're having fun with our power. They're doing terrible things with it. This party is going to end, and this will just help make it even clear who is accountable, who is an ally to him, who had fun while the rule of law was temporarily suspended. Fuck it. If I were you, I wouldn't raise my hand for that money. So I'll tell you, Miles, I can promise right here, with all the Defiance members backing us, we're coming after you. If you're someone who takes a check for the government to go buy a Ferrari because you were so aggrieved by the audacity that we tried to hold you accountable for invading the Capitol and disrupting our fucking election and trying to hang the vice president, I would say no to the money. So we're going to be paying extra attention to you, buddy.
I got better news for you. I don't know if he's going to care about me announcing this or not. But I had said to folks, because we do it live here. We actually do. I'm messaging with our friend Norm Eisen at Democracy Defenders Fund, who are bringing the lawsuit against the Trump administration over this slush fund. And Xander, without having consulted you, because we didn't have time, and this is happening right now, I told Norm that Defiance and Defiance members would be happy to help fund that lawsuit against the Trump administration. So we'll figure out a proper date and time to announce that. But why don't you folks take it as an informal announcement right now that we're going to get in the game on this, and we're going to help fund this effort to sue the Trump administration over this slush fund. And if you haven't seen it, go look up Norm Eisen and Democracy Defenders Fund, because they are out there making noise about this egregious act of corruption. And we're going to stand by them. We're going to stand by them and help them go take the legal fight to this administration to keep this trash from happening. So we're on it, man. We'll find a time to bring Norm on to formally talk about it and see what funding they need for that lawsuit. But yeah, baby, let's do it.
Also, good time to remind everyone. I know we do this every episode. Congress can do something about this. Like, it's always anger at Trump, totally reasonable. We all get it. We're mad at this guy. He's acting insane. He's tearing apart democracy. There's a bunch of totally rational, smart, intelligent people that have chosen their own career ambitions or their own safety or whatever to allow for all this, to allow your money to be sucked up by this sick of, by this wannabe authoritarian, and allowing him to make his allies, his criminal allies, richer on your coin. So that is, it's almost an amendment we need almost like for every story, Miles, is there is a group of people who have the power to stop this. Many of them act like they are very principled. You know, we mentioned some of them earlier. Susan Collins is always upset at what's going on in our country and then can never find the vote we need to stop any of it. So, you know, your daily reminder that Congress can do something, is not doing something, make them pay for it at the polls during the midterms.
Yes, indeed. Also, this is a reminder why to tune in to Defiance Daily. This is the place where you can do things. We've given you an opportunity today to push back on the ballroom. We've given you an opportunity today to support prosecutors around the country who are suing federal agents for breaking the law in their districts. And we also just announced to you, if you're a defiance.org member, you're going to help fund this lawsuit against the slush fund. All of that is happening right now. And we do it in real time. Let's keep on this. And we've got one more story today, Xander, about people fighting back. And goodness knows, in the course of this, you and I might find another way to go out there and help support the fight. But we're going to go from the halls of Congress just down the street to the National Mall. And this is a story we've been waiting to cover until we could get our guests who are on today. So let me catch you up. In a monumental case centered around free speech, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit against the National Park Service. Let me tell you about it, because for several months now, a group called Accountability Now has been holding a continuous protest on federal land in Washington, D.C. with a permit from the National Park Service, doing what they're supposed to be able to do with their First Amendment rights, protesting this administration. And as part of that protest, they put up a series of signs criticizing Donald Trump, including references to public reporting about alleged sexual misconduct. First Amendment. According to the complaint, federal officials then threatened to revoke their protest permit, that permit from Accountability Now because of the signs, claiming the language was, quote, obscene and therefore not protected speech. Now, here's the thing. Obscenity is one of those few categories of speech the government can restrict, but it has a very specific legal definition, and it's a very high bar. The ACLU says this doesn't even come close. Their argument is that this is core political speech, direct criticism of a sitting president, and calling it obscene to criticize the president. Well, that's basically the weaponization of this workaround to shut down protected speech. The group ultimately pulled the signs, not because they agreed, but because they were trying to avoid losing their permit entirely. And now that case is in federal court, with the ACLU asking a judge to step in, protect the speech, and prevent the government from using that standard to silence them. So rather than talk about this from the outside, we're going straight to the people who are living it and the people fighting in court. Joining us now, we've got Randy Kindle, a veteran and member of Accountability Now, who's been part of the demonstration at the center of this dispute, and Art Spitzer, senior counsel at the ACLU of the District of Columbia, who spent more than 45 years defending First Amendment rights and is helping lead this case. It's fantastic to have you with us, friends. Art, I'm going to throw this one to you first because, as the lawyer, I know you'll keep Randy on solid ground because, Randy's liable to give us his bank number if we ask for it. Art, tell us why this case is constitutionally significant, especially in a moment like this.
Well, it's significant because it's just the latest salvo in the Trump administration's down speech they don't like. They kicked Associated Press out of Air Force One because they didn't like the fact that they kept calling it the Gulf of Mexico. They kicked all the reporters out of the Pentagon if they wouldn't agree only to report the news that was spoon-fed to them, and on and on and on. I mean, you and I could both come up with a dozen examples. And so here's a new twist. You don't like the speech, just call it obscene. You could say that everything in the Epstein files is obscene because it's about a topic that is, very distasteful, sex with little girls. But if you call it obscene, then, we can't report about it. We can't protest about it. I don't know if there's actually a plan to enlarge that attack against other reporting on the Epstein files. This is just something that, some Park Service official saw and said, I don't want that on my grass. But it's important to nip it in the bud and to make it very clear that this is not obscene. This is a statement about something that was reported and may or not be true. It may or may not be true that Trump actually had sexual encounters with underage women. That's still up in the air, and I'm sure people are trying to look into it as best they can. But it has been all over the news, and to put up a sign about it is, in our view, unquestionably protected speech.
Randy, how dare you say that the president did obscene things just because he did obscene things?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it's really pretty crazy that me saying what he did is more offensive than what he did to his supporters.
His biography is very,
yeah, very large gap there.
Randy, when did you realize that the government was threatening your ability to display these signs?
Well, so I kind of came up one day, and there was one of the Park Service employees was there and talking to another Accountability Now member about the sign, and basically saying that their bosses had seen it and they wanted it down because it's not protected by free speech. And that's when we kind of had this back and forth discussion with them, and then and then they threatened to pull our permit if we didn't take the signs down.
Art, can I ask you, what is that actual threshold for obscenity? And, in layman's terms, how do you hope the court comes down on this?
Yeah, so the legal definition of obscenity is actually quite technical. But it's sort of the hardest of the hardcore. It has to be very explicit, graphic depiction or description of essentially disgusting sexual acts. It has to be something that appeals to what the court calls the prurient interest in sex. In other words, not a wholesome interest in sex, but a dirty interest in sex, to use,
the wholesome interest like Donald Trump clearly had. Yeah, it's just got to be as wholesome as his conduct.
That's right. But ordinary pornography, which is all over the internet, is not obscene, or it would all be shut down. And of course, these signs were not pornography of any kind. They were just like the news reports you might see on any major news outlet, talking about what was in the Epstein files. The story was actually broken by National Public Radio in March, that they had discovered these pages from the Epstein files that had not been part of the official release, where a woman who had been quite young at the time, now 30 years later, says that President Trump sexually abused her. And, we don't know whether she was telling the truth or not, but the FBI interviewed her several times, and the discussion of that was in the Epstein files. And so NPR talked about it. All the other news outlets picked it up from there, and so did Accountability Now, as was absolutely their right. I've already forgotten the second half of your question. I'm sorry.
I think you answered it.
Yeah.
Randy,
go ahead.
We've been talking about how sometimes the president's actions, even though they're lawless and eventually get reeled in, there's a deterrent element to even them, attempting to do what they're doing to you all. Have you seen that in activism in DC after you all have been attacked in this way? Have you seen it be a deterrence, or have you seen the group become more emboldened and more dedicated to the cause?
Oh no! Every time they kind of come after us, we get a lot more cohesive, because we know we're on the right track.
Yeah.
And I want to point, like, we are getting attacked from all sides by the administration, especially with the First Amendment. It was last week I was in the courtroom with William Kelly, who's arguing a First Amendment case here in DC about calling someone a Nazi. So while we were in court with that, we got a phone call that the Secret Service had read one of our protesters their rights on site to question them about a flag that just had the 8647 on it. Secret Service pulled up, questioned her, and read her rights, and then she refused to talk, so they left. So it's all of this intimidation, these tactics that they keep using. So like, Art said, and you guys said, they've attacked reporters in the Pentagon. They fired the head chaplain at the Department of Defense. They're going after all parts of freedom of the First Amendment, especially like freedom of assembly, with them targeting Antifa, so-called Antifa. So this is a incremental breakdown of the First Amendment, step by step.
Mm-hmm.
Step by step. And, I got to say, as someone who used to oversee the United States Secret Service, there has been an egregious politicizing of that agency. And it just goes to show you there is no agency that this administration will not politicize as part of its crackdown on the political opposition in this country. Remember, early in Donald Trump's tenure, he dispatched the Secret Service to basically go hunt down James Comey. They literally tailed him from North Carolina, where he took that picture of 8647 seashells, and followed him back to his home, ordered him to come into Secret Service offices to be interviewed. He's now being charged by the Justice Department for that photo. Obviously, that case is not going to survive. It's going to fall apart like, crumbled feta in federal court. But the process is the punishment. The process is meant to show people You're going to get sued by the federal government. You're going to have to hire lawyers. We're going to drag you through the mud. And of course, those are the types of things. That's the chilling effect that they want this to have. Now, I'm glad to hear, Randy, it's doing the opposite. As Xander often says on this program, Trump, he calls it taki. Trump always creates idols. In other words, when he attacks people, the fact that more people are finding their courage means he's not scaring them away. He's making them icons. He's making you guys iconic because you're willing to stand up and fight back against this. But I want to ask you, Art, what happens if something like this fails? If the court doesn't stand with Accountability Now and Randy and the ACLU and your position, what does that mean for free speech in this country?
Well, exactly the answer. I mean, in this particular case, all it would mean would be that Accountability Now can't display these two signs. Meanwhile, they have been displaying plenty of other anti-Trump signs calling for his impeachment and removal, for example. So far, the government hasn't made any effort to prevent that. I think it's very unlikely that the courts would think these signs are obscene. But if they do, then, of course, it would encourage the government to use this tactic more against other things that they might think they could label obscene, or that perhaps they might think they could label as fighting words, which is another category of speech that's not protected by the First Amendment. Or that they might be able to label something as a, quote, true threat, which is another unprotected category of speech. Now, so far, even the Roberts Court has been very good on those particular issues. There was a case 10 years ago, more or less, involving videos of people killing animals, stomping on animals. I forget what those kinds of videos were called, squish videos or something like that. And the Roberts Court said, you know, it's disgusting, but it's not obscene. It's not fighting words. It's not a threat, and so it's protected by the First Amendment. And so far, at least, the Supreme Court has been good on this particular issue, and I don't think there's any reason to think they're going to change on this.
Well, look, Art and Randy, we are proud of you guys that you're standing up for free speech in this case. And given what you had on those signs, I'm just going to tease that you might be very interested in the announcement that we're making on Wednesday. When we do our weekly mission brief, we've got an announcement related to Donald Trump and the Epstein files that will probably lead the censors to come after us as well. So if we're not calling you, Randy, to have you participate in it, then at least Art will be calling you to have you defend us in court.
Right, Randy knows how to get a hold of me.
Yeah.
Art and Randy, thank you for everything you're doing. We look forward to staying in touch on this case, and we'll keep folks apprised.
Thanks very much.
Thank you guys so much again for having us. Appreciate it.
There you go.
Well, Xander, in the vein of Defiance, we close every episode, every day, with a segment called Who is Joining the Defiance? Now, it's clear that Art and Randy are already in the Defiance, and they're fighting back in federal court. Hell yeah, those guys are Defiance veterans. But this one today, the person that we're highlighting, I love this story because these are the things that really get under Donald Trump's skin, which is important because when you get under his skin, he makes mistakes. He makes himself more liable to be exposed. And tonight on Who is Joining the Defiance, we go to one of his favorite places in the world where he tries to escape all of the accountability, and that's the golf course. And more specifically, the airspace above a very special golf course. A performance artist named Suki carved a massive message into a field near Trump National Golf Club reading 8647 equals impeach. You see it there on the screen. The message was designed to be seen from the sky as planes fly into the property throughout the summer. That includes Donald Trump's Air Force One. Now, Suki was clear to include the word impeach below the call to 8647 since Donald Trump has gotten so sensitive and says when people say 8647, they're threatening to assassinate him. so there would be no confusion that they are not calling for violence when they write 8647, 8647, 8647. You shouldn't be scared to say 4 numbers, folks. It is an indication that we're slipping into autocracy if we're scared to say 8647, 8647, 8647. We're not scared to do it on this program. We're not scared for a knock from the Secret Service because we know our rights. We're willing to protect the First Amendment in this country, and we do want to 8647. We want to kick this guy out, right? Lawfully, defiantly, peacefully, and that's okay to say. So hats off to Suki for going out there and standing up to free speech, literally carving it into a field.
We need some 8647 shirts, Defiant shirts. I would love an 8647.
We're way behind.
Shirts. We're way behind on that. We got to get those rocking. We got, gang, let us know if you want an 8647 Defiant shirt. I'll make sure Miles works overtime today. We'll get those up for you.
Yeah, send us tell us in the comments, or if you're watching on Substack, hit the heart button. And if we see a nice stream of hearts there, that'll be all the voting that we need to put up an 8647 Defiance shirt. We'll try to come up with a fun, pithier approach because there's lots of different ones out there. But yeah, give us your ideas. Give us your ideas.
They're not Defiance.org shirts. You get to wrap it on the front and back. You get to piss them off on both sides of the shirt.
You know, I got to tell you, Xander, in the winter, I guess it was toward the end of spring when this happened. Whenever they first started going after Comey, and when he posted the seashell thing last year, my wife was knitting headbands for friends, and there's a farmer's market not far from us, and she was like, "Should I knit 8647 headbands to sell?" And I was like, "Oh, heck yeah!" But at that point in time, right? We always talk about a year ago, people were really scared. You know, we protested that with a couple friends, and they're like, "I don't know if I'd sell those at the market." If Hannah had done that back then, honey, we would be rolling in it. We'd be rolling in it.
She'd be the star of the show. She would have got talkie. Her following would be way bigger than yours. She'd be my co-host. It would be a different
world. 8647 like ski headbands. That would have been the thing. We missed the moment. Xander, let's close out by taking a few Defiance.org member questions. If you're a member of Defiance.org, you can ask questions in the chat. Federal Limits asks, question, an upcoming ruling is expected to put independent regulators under presidential control. And there's a link to a Mother Jones article that I think is there in the chat. And the question is, thoughts on that? Well, look, a couple things. And Xander, feel free to weigh in on any of this. There's a pretty alarming effort underway, if you missed it, in the Trump administration to exert presidential authority over supposedly independent regulators. The FCC, for instance, the Federal Communication Commission that oversees the broadcast networks, is notionally supposed to be independent. Organizations like the Federal Election Commission, efforts like the Voice of America are supposed to be quasi-independent. There are a number of bodies, the Federal Reserve, that Congress has created, and Congress over the years has said we want these to be independent, somewhat independent of presidential control. Why? Well, presumably in each of those cases, Congress had a reason, namely an executive branch that was allowed to unilaterally run those entities could run the country into the ground, or in the case of the FCC, run roughshod over First Amendment rights, or in the case of the Federal Reserve, completely wreck the nation's economy with the stroke of a pen. And so those agencies had been given independence. This is now something that the Trump administration is challenging in court, and they're trying to exert presidential control over those. Look, my thoughts on this, Federal Limits, is it is a very dangerous assault on the limits of executive power. And if the administration prevails in some of these legal efforts, we could be talking about a very different country altogether. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for a moment, Xander, if you want to dive in. But this is also, I'll just say, this is also something that a number of the organizations we have supported and granted to are fighting on behalf of the plaintiffs. So a number of the legal organizations we've stood behind are out there doing amicus briefs and things like that to make sure that we preserve the independence of independent federal agencies.
Yeah, when Miles says a very different country, he means just look at Russia. Trump wants to be Putin. That's what he wants. He wants all the powers that Putin has. He wants to do the things Putin's able to do, but he's also dumber. And so he'll probably hurt us in various ways that, or to more extremes than Putin, specifically when we talk about his desire to lower the interest rates, despite the Fed constantly saying it's a terrible idea and it'll drive up inflation. We saw Erdogan do the same in Turkey. Like, these rules don't come from nowhere. The need for these agencies and different departments to be independent. They come from history and watching countries across the world and throughout time fail in various ways because a strong man decided to make dumb decisions with no checks in place. Russia's a good example of how that works now, but there's lots of examples throughout history. And there's lots of reasons we put these rules in place. And so we need to, you all know this because you're listening here. We need to keep fighting for them. We need to keep getting creative about how to get our neighbors involved and our friends and our cousins to fight for them as well, in all the ways we can now and to turn out during the midterms and 2028.
Get your cousins.
Get your cousins.
That's
the cousins.
today.
They've been the ones that have been up to mischief. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. I've got a couple of them. You've got a couple of them.
That's so true. Everyone's got a mischievous cousin or two. Yeah, get them into the fight. Have them join the Defiance. Think about that mischievous cousin and say, today they were talking about you on this program. Check out Defiance.org.
He might jump straight to the Defiance, but like get him to relax, maybe read a book, some history.
Maybe read a book. Xander, two things that I'll say. One, I'm glad that you mentioned how this happened in Russia, because I vividly remember 20 years ago during the first Bush administration, all of the news reporting at the time of what Putin was doing in Russia. And it was exactly things like this. At that point in time, is he was, clamping down on free speech. He was clamping down on nonprofit organizations that were critical of his administration, just like the Trump administration has been suing organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. Putin was, restricting the independence of, Russian agencies. I mean, it was all the things that we're seeing now, except we're just seeing it happen here a lot more quickly.
That had to be wild, being in that position you were in during that time, because we weren't like that far removed from Yeltsin and maybe the end of NATO. Maybe NATO wasn't relevant anymore. Russians were into American culture. Like they might be included in our global economy in significant ways. It was probably, from your vantage point, crazy to see Russia descend that quickly and once again become an antagonistic authoritarian country.
Yeah, the hopes were dashed. And let's hope that's not the case here. And, if anyone read the piece that we wrote this morning on defiance.news, our news site, I made a comparison to what happened during the Roman Empire. There's, a lot of people have heard, the name Nero, the Emperor Nero, and how he fiddled while Rome burned. Well, the actual story of that, or the alleged story from the time period, is the Roman emperor went back into the city after there was a huge fire, a great fire in Rome, and the embers were still hot. And you would think he'd be swooping in like FEMA to say, we got to rebuild and let's help all these people. Instead, his idea was, my palace got partly burnt down by this. Why don't I build a much bigger palace, a much gaudier palace? It was literally called the Golden House. And he set about to go build this massive palace. And he did. This is not myth. This is true story. This massive palace. What was the result of that? The people were pissed. And he increased their taxes to pay for his new palace. This week in Washington, D.C., you've got the United States Senate, much like the Roman Senate did back then, preparing to rubber stamp Donald Trump's ballroom, Donald Trump's new palace that he wants. They're literally talking about chandelier security on Capitol Hill, okay? We need to make clear, as we talked about earlier in this program, to our representatives how incredibly off track we think they are. And I know a number of people have posted that phone number in the chat if you wanted to call Capitol Hill and let senators like Susan Collins and Dan Sullivan and John Husted know how you feel about them voting on ballrooms instead of addressing inflation and wars and the ongoing corruption of this administration. So be sure to do that. Stand up. And there's going to be a lot to talk about this week, Xander. Tomorrow, we're going to be giving some updates on a number of different efforts we have underway, including GTFO ICE. I know last week we had talked about the first action was going to go out to the GTFO ICE Rapid Response Network. That got delayed a couple of days because we're just getting our ducks in the row. But Xander, I think I can confidently say this week, the people who are part of that rapid response network are going to get their first marching orders to go out there and stand up against the abuses inside these ICE facilities. Am I right?
I'm so fired up about what this network's going to achieve. Gang, like one of the most inspiring things in this job is when you sometimes watching the news, and we hope we don't add to that feeling, but sometimes when you watch the news, you just see all the bad things that are happening. And then when Miles and I do a lap with all the leaders in the space, you hear about all the wins. Trump and his goons are getting shot down left and right. And that's especially true with the fight against detention centers. There's local groups all over the country that are winning this fight, that are stopping detention centers from being built. And we are ready to add as much muscle and firepower as we can to those fights and help out local groups from across the country as both a national network and as a network of locals that are going to be added to fights when they spring up. And so this first activation, we're going to talk more about the vigils that our Friends of Workers Circle are running across the country to bring awareness to detention center fights across the country, and as a means of organizing your community, your cousins, even maybe you could bring into one of these vigils. And so we're going to be sending out an announcement to that whole group about how to put on one of these vigils, how to take part in them. And then also, if there happens to be a detention center in your area, you'll get more specific directions about what to do in your specific fight.
Welcome to the Get Shit Done crew. In fact, I wrote down 3 other things on my list, Xander, which is we're going to get back to you all about how we're going to help support this Democracy Defenders Fund lawsuit against Donald Trump's slush fund that he just announced today. Defiance.org is going to get in the game on that. And if you're a member of Defiance.org, you are going to be personally involved in helping to sue this administration over that egregious slush fund. I also have written here, Xander, as I mentioned earlier in the program, you'll see that announcement that we teased last week in the press sometime, hopefully tonight or tomorrow, about the fight against federal overreach and the efforts that they're going to be taking to protect our elections. This was the group that we incubated, that we talked about earlier, of local prosecutors around the country. Also, a note for any Defiance.org members who signed up to support FAFO. Here's the good news. It's now its own organization. So we emailed y'all last week to let you know, if you had subscribed to support FAFO, your subscription, it got canceled, but for a good reason, because you helped seed fund that effort, and it's now its own standalone 501c4 organization. It's its own nonprofit, which is amazing. That was the goal, is to stand this up. If you want to continue to support their work, just go to federaloverreach.org, and when you sign back up, you're directly supporting them. You're not seed funding it through Defiance. That was an amazing effort. We're going to send up a follow-up communication around that just to make sure folks understand that this is a good thing. Your subscription to supporting them wasn't canceled for bad reasons. It's because they're now their own entity. And so we want to drive you to go support the growth of that entity. And then finally, Xander, just a reminder for folks, you're not going to want to miss the weekly mission brief on Wednesday. I know I say that every week. I really, really mean it this week. It's going to be a little bit later in the day on Wednesday. If you watch every weekly mission brief, listen to these words. We're going to start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, not at 5 p.m. Eastern like we normally do. We're going to start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern this Wednesday, and we're going to announce a way to keep the Epstein-Trump corruption front and center across the country until the midterms. And I mean that, across the country. We're going to put the wheels on this thing. I mean that too. And we'll tell you what we mean on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on a special edition of Defiance Daily, where we announce the action that we are taking this week to fight Donald Trump's corruption. Xander, I think that was a very bloated program in terms of actions people can take to fight back, and it's not even a weekly mission brief day. But we got a hell of a week ahead of us.
If it's too much, let us know. If you want more, let us know. I think it was awesome. And you know what, Miles, what I like so much about what we're doing here, it feels optimistic. Like I feel like there's such a, it can feel like this whole crisis is out of our hands, that we don't have autonomy in it, that it's beyond us. It's the federal government, et cetera. And I think we're here to let folks know, and our members in their efforts, letting the rest of the country know, it's not out of our hands. It's not out of our hands. We can do something. We are doing something. And every time these guys come up with a new corrupt way to try to challenge our democracy, we're going to step up and we're going to defeat them. So
let's
it's
get
just
it, guys.
fun doing this with you, buddy.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. I'm your host, Miles Taylor. This is my co-host and co-founder, Xander Schultz. Join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. Put a big red circle around 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday and join us for the weekly mission brief. And in the meantime, as we always say, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. We'll see you soon.
See ya.